Under the blazing torches of Constantinople's Hippodrome, tens of thousands of voices once merged into a single roar, their eyes fixed upon the arena where a child no older than 10 lay motionless beneath the harsh light. Around her, trained swans pecked barley seeds from her bare skin, while coins rained from the stands like metallic blessings. To the crowd, it was entertainment. To history, it was the beginning of one of its darkest miracles. Her name was Theodora. She was born into a world where power was inherited through corruption and survival demanded submission. Yet from this pit of humiliation, she would rise higher than any woman before her, higher even than those who once owned her body. Her journey from victim to empress would not simply change the fate of an empire. It would expose how pain can be transformed into the purest form of power. This is not a tale of triumph. It is a study in transformation, a revelation of how suffering, when weaponized, can shape the destiny of nations. To understand Theodora's rise, we must begin where her soul was first broken, the arena that made her and the empire that allowed it. In the 6th century, Constantinople was the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire, a city where faith and decadence danced side by side. At its center stood the Hippodrome, an enormous arena that could hold 80,000 souls. Here, politics, entertainment, and violence merged into a single religion. To be seen in the Hippodrome was to exist. To be forgotten by it was to vanish from history. It was in this world that a man named Acacius worked as the keeper of the Green Bears. He trained beasts for combat and for show, a position that carried both respect and stability. His daughter, Theodora, lived among the echo of drums and the growl of animals behind the wooden gates of the arena. But when Acacius died suddenly, his family's protection died with him. By law, his widow and daughters should have inherited his position, but corruption ruled where justice should have spoken. A man named Asterius, master of the Green's dancers, took a bribe and gave the post to another. With a single signature, he condemned 3 young girls to the most refined system of child exploitation the ancient world had ever known. Theodora's mother stood at a crossroads no parent should face watch her children starve or surrender them to the machinery of survival. In desperation, she dressed her daughters in garlands of laurel, paraded them before 80,000 spectators, and begged the crowd for mercy. The arena responded not with compassion, but with appetite. In that moment, the Hippodrome revealed its true nature. It was not merely a stage for chariot races or theater. It was a marketplace of flesh, a temple where innocence was sacrificed to pleasure and spectacle. Rome's legacy had found its darkest continuation in Byzantium, where even children could be traded in plain sight. To the crowd, this ritual was tradition. To Theodora, it was revelation. She learned that in the empire's hierarchy, mercy was a myth. The only law that mattered was desire raw, public, and absolute. By the time she reached 10, Theodora had become one of the Hippodrome's living ornaments, forced to perform in scenes designed to humiliate and arouse. Each cheer from the stands was both applause and judgment. Each coin that struck her skin carried a lesson she would never forget. Power was not given, it was taken, often in the most brutal ways imaginable. What the audience could not know was that they were shaping something far more dangerous than a performer. They were forging a survivor, one who would learn that the human body could be both a weapon and a shield, and that domination, once understood, could be reversed. Theodora's childhood ended not with a whisper, but with the echo of the crowd that believed they had broken her. In truth, they had built her. For most, the Hippodrome was a place of destruction. But for Theodora, it became a classroom. Beneath the noise and cruelty, she studied the silent mechanics of power. She watched senators lose their composure, nobles become beggars for pleasure, and merchants destroy their dignity with a handful of coins. Every scream from the stands, every bribe exchanged behind the curtains became a fragment of knowledge she would one day use to rule an empire. At 16, her lessons turned into strategy. Her beauty, sharpened by survival, drew the attention of Hesperus, the powerful governor of Libya. He offered her what seemed like salvation, luxury, protection, and freedom from the arena's humiliation. But freedom in Byzantium always had a price. For 4 years, Theodora lived within the marble walls of Hesperus' palace, his prized concubine. There, she learned the final truth about men of power. They fear nothing more than losing control. Her body became the battlefield where politics and desire collided. She began to test how words could direct decisions, how affection could bend judgment, how pleasure could become a leash around a man's mind. But when Hesebulus discovered that his own decrees were shifting under her influence, the illusion shattered. In a moment of rage, he hurled her into the desert alone, barefoot and stripped of everything. Yet, in that brutal exile, Theodora underwent her true transformation. What had once been humiliation now became armor. What had once been submission now became calculation. She crossed the Mediterranean like a shadow, surviving by selling what the world had taught her to sell. On each ship, she met a different man and dissected a different weakness. A merchant's greed, a captain's guilt, a priest's hypocrisy, she cataloged them all. Every encounter was a new experiment in human nature. She no longer sought survival, she sought understanding. In Alexandria, she found both sanctuary and opportunity. There she met Patriarch Timothy III, leader of the Monophysite Christians. To him, her conversion was an act of faith. To her, it was the beginning of influence through a different language, the language of belief. Faith, she realized, could command men even more completely than desire. Her next stop was Antioch, where fate itself seemed to recognize her. A performer from the blues faction named Macedonia told her of a Prince Justinian who had begun asking about a woman of scandalous reputation, one who had survived the impossible. He wanted to meet her. As Theodora sailed back toward Constantinople, the skyline of her childhood rose from the mist. The city that had humiliated her now awaited its reckoning. Behind those golden domes was the empire that had turned her into an object. Now she would become its ruler. When Theodora returned to Constantinople in 522 CE, the empire was in a quiet state of decay. Corruption spread through the palace like smoke, and senators whispered about power as if it were a curse. Into this stagnant world walked a woman who had been forged in fire. Prince Justinian saw her first at a private court gathering. To him, she appeared as a vision, graceful, articulate, and unlike any woman he had ever known. But beneath her charm lay 16 years of studied observation. She spoke to him not as a subject to her master, but as an equal, crafting every word to strike where his defenses were weakest. Justinian believed he was falling in love. In truth, he was falling under control. Their union shocked the empire. The Senate raged. Religious leaders protested. Even Empress Euphemia, wife of the reigning Emperor Justinian, stood against it. Law forbade senators from marrying actresses, and Euphemia's disdain was personal. She too had risen from slavery, but without scandal. To her, Theodora embodied corruption disguised as ambition. Yet power bends rules to those who understand how to use it. In 523 CE, Euphemia died suddenly in her sleep. There were no witnesses, no illness, no suspicion voiced aloud, only a silence heavy enough to suggest that Theodora had learned one final lesson from her years among traffickers: how death can be made to look natural. Within months, Emperor Justinian rewrote the law that had barred actresses from nobility. Theodora married Justinian beneath the towering domes of Hagia Sophia, dressed not in shame but in imperial purple. Each step down the marble aisle was a declaration that the powerless child of the Hippodrome now ruled the very institution that once sold her body. Her influence over Justinian grew absolute. What began as seduction matured into partnership. She sat beside him at council meetings, signed decrees in her own name, and reshaped the empire's political core. Yet the same psychology that had once helped her survive now defined her rule: domination through fear, control through humiliation, and obedience through spectacle. That philosophy would face its ultimate test in the year 532, when the Blues and the Greens, the two mighty factions of the city, united in revolt. The streets of Constantinople became rivers of fire. Cries of times, Nika, asterisk victory, echoed from every corner. For the first time, the mob that had once adored her demanded her death. Justinian's advisors begged him to flee. The treasury was packed onto ships. Escape was possible. But Theodora rose from her throne, her voice steady as the city burned outside. Those who have worn the purple, she said, should never live to see themselves stripped of it. Royalty is the noblest burial shroud. Her words changed history. Justinian stayed. His generals, Belisarius and Mundus, sealed the Hippodrome, trapping tens of thousands of rebels inside the arena. The slaughter that followed lasted a single day. When the gates finally opened, 30,000 corpses carpeted the same sand that had once absorbed the tears of a 10-year-old girl named Theodora. To some, it was vengeance. To others, divine justice. To Theodora, it was necessity. She had learned as a child that mercy was weakness, and weakness was death. Now, that lesson had become law. In the years after the Nika revolt, Theodora ruled beside Justinian as the most formidable woman in Byzantine history. Her authority stretched far beyond the throne. Behind closed doors, she ran a secret network of spies, informants, and courtiers who fed her every whisper of treason and desire that passed through the palace. She understood that true rule was not about armies or titles, it was about information and fear. Those who had once mocked her as a courtesan now bowed until their foreheads touched the marble floor. Each act of submission was a mirror of her past, a reversal of humiliation turned into ceremony. But her reign was not only vengeance. Beneath the cruelty lay something complex, almost tragic, a need to rebuild the world that had once destroyed her. Theodora's legal reforms changed the empire's moral foundation. She outlawed forced prostitution, made it illegal for brothel keepers to imprison women, and created sanctuaries known as the metanoia convents, where former performers could live in peace. For the first time, women could divorce abusive husbands, claim property, and demand justice. She even decreed that rape, regardless of social status, would be punished by death. To the oppressed, she was a savior. To the powerful, she remained a reminder that mercy often hides a blade. Yet her compassion always carried the mark of control. The same convents that rescued women also confined them. The same laws that protected them bound them to her authority. Theodora had transformed her pain into a structure of governance, half redemption, half retribution. When she died in 548 CE, likely of cancer, the empire itself seemed to dim. Justinian, once the brilliant strategist of Byzantium, became a shadow of his former self. He never remarried, never recovered, and for 17 years ruled without the sharp mind that had once guided him. The great legal code he left behind, the Times Corpus Juris Civilis Asterisk, bore her unseen fingerprints traces of a woman who had learned justice through suffering. Centuries later, mosaics in the Basilica of San Vitale in Ravenna still capture her gaze, calm, majestic, almost divine. She stands taller than those beside her, robed in gold and purple, holding a chalice as if offering forgiveness to the world that once condemned her. But behind that serene expression lies the memory of a child performing for coins, a girl who learned to master cruelty by surviving it. Theodora's life forces us to confront a question that history rarely answers. Can trauma truly create greatness, or does it simply disguise it in power? She rose from the lowest depths to the highest throne, proving that pain can indeed build empires, but at a cost measured in blood and silence. Her story endures not because she ruled, but because she reminds us of an uncomfortable truth. Barbaric systems do not always destroy their victims. Sometimes they create rulers. And when they do, the world itself must bear the consequences.